Hello, everyone. Welcome to a Wall Street for Main Street podcast. My name is Dawoud, and our special guest today is Chris Duane. He is the founder of the Sons of Liberty Academy and The Truth Never Told, and he runs a blog called Don't Trend on Me, all dedicated to educating people about silver market and the monetary system and the upcoming economic collapse. Chris, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Mo. Thanks for having me on.
Great. And I want to get started with this interview talking about your background.
Yep.
Now, your family had a car dealership company in New Jersey, and you decided to drop everything in 2008 because you saw the collapse coming in the housing market and the economy.
Yes.
So I want to ask you, what event caused you to leave your business and start educating people about the economic collapse?
Well, it wasn't one that happened overnight. And it came out of probably March of 2005 when I realized that there was no political fix for this problem, that both sides are bought and paid for, and they seem that they want to increase the amount of debt every year in excess of the debt and interest accrued the year before. And I wanted to know why things were so good in 2005 and why it wasn't always this way. And when I started to research it, I realized that money is debt, and that debt must increase every year in excess of the debt and interest accrued the year before if it's a debt-based finance currency. And I said, well, wow, no wonder things are good. There's a lot of debt being created with the housing bubble and the war spending and the government spending and the consumer spending. Everybody's creating debt, and that's why there's this wealth effect of things looking really good. And very rare is the person that wakes up at the top saying, things are really good, maybe I should change my life, and that's what I did. Usually people have to wait until they hit rock bottom before they start questioning the principles that guide their life. And once you realize that our monetary system is debt-based, you also know that the end of this story is that there's going to be a tremendous collapse that's going to happen when the currency fails. Because when the currency fails, the markets fail, and everything fails. Cash is the nexus of all human interaction, and if we cannot trust the simple means of commerce between us, social contracts, financial contracts, everything's going to break. And so my first step was in 2005 was to sell my house that I had bought at the top of the housing bubble, July of 2005 in New Jersey. And rent for the next 3 years. And I spent the next 3 years trying to convince my baby boomer partners and parents that the sun wasn't going to shine forever, and that they, being very much more exposed to the consumer market and the real estate market than I was, need to sell everything while the getting was good. And for the next 3 years, I pleaded my case and summarily ignored as the young guy who didn't know anything. And by the time May of 2008 came by, I felt that something really bad was going to happen, and I didn't want to have millions of dollars worth of assets turn into millions of dollars worth of my debt. So I went to my father and I said, I want out. And he says, I could have out, but you're not getting a dime for it. So I walked away from millions of dollars worth of assets that was my rightful inheritance, and quite honestly, a lot of the property that I owned for many years, walked away from it and walked away from nothing. But it wasn't long until from May to October of 2008 that all those fictitious assets valuations were only good when the economy was functioning. And as soon as the economy started to hiccup, millions of dollars worth of assets turned into millions of dollars worth of debt. And now it's been 4 years past that day. We still have not dealt with any of the systemic problems, and we're headed for a much larger, not institutional collapse like we saw in 2008, but a sovereign collapse. And whenever it happens, the whole world's going to change permanently.
And that's a very interesting story there. I think one of the hardest things to do is to convince your close relatives and family about the upcoming collapse, whether with the housing bubble back in the day or right now with the debt bubble or college bubble or credit bubble, whatever you may want to call it, that's coming in the next few years. I think that's the hardest thing to do when you have a great awakening like that.
And there's a reason for that, is because right now there's 7 billion people who at any point in time think that they're absolutely right about everything that they know. There isn't one person who goes, I don't know anything. Everybody thinks that they know something. So when you become awakened, what do you end up doing? We have 7 billion people that are constantly trying to push their ideas onto other people. And all that does is lead to people pushing back. Because if I physically pushed you, you're going to push me back. Well, what are we doing with our ideas? We were waking up to say that this system's unsustainable, and we're pushing that on people who are embracing their denial. Right now it's great to be in denial. You get credit card debt and TVs and video games and food and EBT cards and banker bailouts, and it's great to be in denial. But the reality is that you can ignore it for so long before that reality creeps in. So what I try to tell people is stop trying to wake up other people and simply be what you think is the right thing to do. And guess what? People will follow you. But the more you try to push your ideas onto other people, you're actually working against what you would like to see them waking up. The more that you're able to walk your path in peace, you'll end up waking up a lot more people that way.
That's a great point. Now, I want to shift gears here and talk about the silver market, which you've been educating your audience about. One of the benefits of the Great Awakening is you be able to get in early on a market that in a bull market, but it's still in the early phases, which is the precious metals market. And because, most of these type of investors, the silver and gold investors, most of them see a collapse coming in the currency, so that's why they invest in that. That's one of the reasons. Now that the election is over, I'm looking at the silver chart, and we had a dip during the election, and it went close to $30, but it bounced off the 200-day moving average and went back up. So what do you see happening in the silver chart now that the election is over?
Well, I'm not a technical guy, and quite honestly, I think all dollar predictions and timing and markets, to me, is irrelevant. The only reason why I got involved in silver is because I went through this little logical scenario that says, well, if the currencies collapse, then the economy will collapse, the markets will collapse, and the valuations of everything will collapse. And it came down to the idea that all paper assets have counterparty risk and are intangible, meaning that you can't physically own it. It's based off somebody else making good on a promise, whether it's a bond with a debt payment, stock with a CEO, or futures contract with like an MF Global. There's counterparty risk along all those different things, and the only things that you can really rely upon in those situations are real tangible assets. Well, what are they? Commodities. Well, what are commodities? Well, they're everything from raw materials to food to cotton. And when I started to research that, I said, well, okay, I know I got to be out of all paper assets, and most commodities are pretty difficult to own. They either have storage issues or degradation issues where that they become worth less the longer you own it. And then there's also an idea that, how do you store $1 million worth of cotton, and, how do you get rid of it, and how do you secure it and stuff like that? And that's what brings you eventually to precious metals. And you can buy a ton of copper for, I don't know, $6,000 or $8,000, but good luck moving that and storing that, and that's certainly not a lot of value in a lot of space, which leaves you with gold and silver. And the choice between gold and silver to me became very simple, that gold and silver come out of the ground at a 1-to-9 ratio. For every 1 ounce of gold, there's 9 ounces of silver that is mined throughout all of the world at any point. And historically, it used to be a 1-to-12 ratio, and as far back as maybe 200-300 years ago, it used to be a 1-to-16 ratio. That was the natural ratio came out of the ground. But because most silver is a relatively shallowly mined metal, it's getting used up at a faster pace, so that 1-to-16 has dropped down to a 1-to-9. And the idea that I can go out and buy 1 ounce of gold or 53 ounces of silver says to me that silver is tremendously undervalued relative to the natural ratio that it comes out of the ground than gold, and that regardless whatever dollar price or whatever real purchasing power that gold has, silver should rise 5 times faster than gold just to get back to its natural ratio. And then the final caveat that I put on there, that whole little logical conclusion, is that gold, 90% of the gold that's ever been mined has been treasured, has been secured and kept safe and not thrown away. and probably 90% of the silver stockpiles that have ever been mined have been used and abused as an cheap industrial metal, so much so that we're throwing it away in such massive amounts of quantities into toxic landfills that for all intents and purposes it's gone. And if we know that we've been throwing away silver and storing gold, to me that 1-to-9 natural ratio that's in existence, I think we're going to go past that and maybe even get to a 1-to-1 ratio of gold and silver value. And I don't care what the dollar price is. I only care about the relative value between gold and silver and other relative assets out there.
And if you look at the supply of silver, the supply is a lot tighter than gold. So, because it's used for industrial use, and the increasing investor demand for silver is going up. If you look at the demand in silver in 2012, China has accumulated 7,700 metric tons, while India has over 4,000 tons, and that's a total of 12,000, which is more than half of the 2011 global silver supply. So it would make sense to argue that silver should be able to catch up with the price of gold and become 1-to-1 ratio because the supply is so much tighter in the silver market.
Silver's 10,000 uses. I mean, it's now been used to. They're saying it could be used to fight cancer. It's the most reflective. It's the most conductive. It's it really is a wonder metal. Whereas gold, I'll be honest. I love holding gold. I think it's for holding it, it's great and stuff like that. But it doesn't really have a ton of uses. In a collapse scenario, one of the people go, oh, in a collapse scenario, the industrial use of silver is going to collapse, and that's going to hurt the price of it. Yeah, well, that could be the case, or the investment demand and the monetary demand, which doesn't exist at all anywhere, is going to skyrocket when the world's fiat currencies fail. Some parts of humanity are going to go back to the most commonly used in any form of society and throughout all of history. Silver has been the most commonly used form of money. And I've got to imagine that somewhere, even if it's at a local barter level, monetary demand of silver is going to skyrocket at a time when the humanity is going to start looking for answers.
And that's a great point. Now, I've heard arguments about that the supply of silver is becoming more and more scarce, and that eventually it will become very rare or non-existent in the near future because of the high investor demand and more discovery for new uses of silver. Do you believe that could happen in the near future?
Yeah, I wrote to the United States Geological Survey and asked them. They said by 2020, if given the current consumption, silver is going to be the first metal to become extinct. And I asked them, I said, that doesn't sound like something the United States Geological Survey would write. So I questioned him, and the guy said, well, I don't think that the USGS would say that silver would ever go extinct, but given the fact that we're currently consuming at this pace, either a wiser use of the metal or drastically higher prices to force wiser use of the metal and bring on more production is the only solution out there. And that rings true. You can't continue to destroy a supply of something that's cheap without ultimately hurting the supply, causing the price of it to rise dramatically, which either brings down the industrial use of it, where it's more higher used materials, or to bring on higher prices, bring on higher production. And at $30 silver, these silver companies are losing money on silver.
And that's a great point there. And I believe that silver will outperform gold because of the tight supply in the silver market. And I wouldn't be surprised to see if the silver catch up to the gold prices as well.
It could. I mean, it's either way. Even if we're off, we're still going to be doing drastically better than any other asset out there. I just saw a chart of the best performing assets since Barack has been president, and silver is hugely ahead of just about everything else, including gold, up almost 200% in his last 4 years. And I can't imagine what another $5 trillion or $10 trillion of debt and spending that Obama's got in there is going to do to the price of silver.
Well, if you had to make a conservative guess, I believe silver will hit all-time high in the next 4 years under Obama.
That's
Definitely.
definitely a very conservative guess, considering we were almost there about a year and a half ago.
Oh yeah. That's a good point right there. Now I want to shift gears and talk about the economy and its relation to politics. Unfortunately, politics has a big part of the economy. It shouldn't, but it is in the U.S., in Europe, and all over the globe. Now, Obama won the 2012 election, which was no surprise to me. I predicted that he would win. It wouldn't be even close. Now, the last 4 years, he increased government spending. The U.S. debt went up exponentially. And in the last 4 years, we had a strong case of stagflation, where we had higher unemployment and high inflation. Do you believe the next 4 years will be any different than the last 4 years under
Yeah, I
Obama?
think it's going to be worse, much worse. I mean, we've been the honeymoon that we've had after the 2008 to me has been amazing. Forget about his $5 trillion that he added onto the debt. Think about the 23 trillion or the 16 and then ultimately 23 trillion that the Fed put in there. There's Bloomberg articles. I think there was a Freedom of Information Act about how much money the Federal Reserve backed the entire world economy with debt, and they put out $16 trillion of money out there into the backing up banks, and not just the United States, all over the world to keep the system going. And ultimately, what's going to end up happening is that these dollars are coming home to roost at some point. And I think it's going to come from the international scene of the world rejecting the dollar, and that they're going to find themselves finding more and more dollars chasing after fewer and fewer goods and commodities out there. We've seen already, China last month, I think, imported like 56 tons of gold. And over the past year has imported more gold than the official holdings of India. Those are dollars that are chasing after gold. They're making oil contracts all over the world. They're building up new markets, new reserve currencies, and these BRIC nations are dumping the dollar all over the place. I mean, the news of Japan and China, the number 2 and number 3 world economies, dumping the dollar in bilateral trade is a death nail that's coming. And it's, China's got now, I think, 16 agreements to drop the dollar all over the place. Well, these dollars are in existence, and they're going to end up finding themselves into something. And whether it's the currency, whether it's the commodity markets, the real estate markets, they're going to end up coming home to roost. And it's going to be very expensive to live inside the United States. And I don't think that the average American's price or wages, even if they have a job, is going to keep up with the cost of living. And then we're going to see a tremendous destruction of wealth, and it's coming.
Yeah, and if you look at who's the number one holder in all the Treasury bond, it's not any country. It's actually a bank. It's the Federal Reserve that holds most of the Treasury bonds for the government. And if you look at what's going on in China, they reduced their holding in Treasury in the past decade, ever since the housing bubble started after 2001. And it's gone down to all the way to around 40% now of the total holding in the reserve. So that indicated that the dollar is losing its world reserve currency status. And also, if you look at what China, Iran, and Russia are doing, they're buying oil using different currency now. So it all indicates that
Turkey's buying oil from Iran with gold and getting a discount on it. So while oil may be, I don't know, $90 a barrel in dollar terms, that the people are probably getting a discount in terms of gold. And to buy that oil, so it's beneficial for both, because Iran doesn't have access to the SWIFT market anymore, and that they're using it to buy real tangible assets. And what does that do? That forces these countries like Turkey to go out onto the market to go buy gold, to go get oil from Iran at a discount, and that they're going to end up dumping dollars. And there's just going to be this little whirlpool, and we're all circling around the idea that there's an infinite amount of money in a very limited world, and at some point it's just going to keep spinning and spinning until the people that hold these assets, like the silver stackers out there, aren't going to sell for any price. That's why I tell people I don't care if the price of silver goes to $50, $100, $500, or $5,000, because watching the history of currency collapses, the day that it goes to $5,000 means it's going to be $50,000 the next week. And that if you're buying silver for a dollar price target or trading it, worse trading it, you're in it for the wrong game. And the idea is that we know what the end of the story is, that all these currencies are going to fail in the markets and the historical significance of all that happening, and that the only way of protecting yourself is real tangible assets. And I think silver is going to outperform just about everything else out there.
And that's a good point there. Another thing I noticed in the past couple of years in the United States is people's perception and attitude toward free market and capitalism, which gone in the negative side, resulting in the 2008 financial crisis, even though we never actually had a free market in this country since probably 1913, when the Federal Reserve was created. Are you worried about people's perception and attitude toward free market and capitalism will have a bad effect in the economy, where we'll see the government start taking more and more control of the economy as they have now?
If you asked me 2 years ago, yeah, I'd be upset and crying about it and worrying about it. But the reality is I've been able to walk away from that reality a long time ago, and I understand that this has to happen. A collapse must happen. It's no joke that the younger kids nowadays are more apt to lean towards socialism when you've had a school that's indoctrinated them into that. They don't teach entrepreneurship or even how to balance a checkbook, so why would you expect kids to embrace capitalism? And then when our fascism that we've had has been so rampant and gets bailed out, they use the false Hegelian dialectic of socialism versus fascism, Wall Street versus Washington. And that's why I think that the Tea Party was wrong for marching on Washington to reform, to change the system. What they all should have done is 1 million people should have walked away from the system, closed their bank accounts, stopped watching TV, stopped voting for these political puppets, and empowered themselves. And I think Occupy Wall Street's wrong because they want more regulation of a market that's heavily regulated. And quite honestly, it's the regulation that keeps these guys in power. And that if we did have free markets, there would be no too big to fail. It just simply cannot exist in a free market, and that's the problem. So, the long answer is, yeah, all these kids, grasping onto it and voting in Obama and all these socialistic programs. But to me, all that's going to do is speed up the process to the end of the day when we get the reality check of a collapsed system. And then after people hit rock bottom, then maybe people will question what they've been doing with their world and realize that there is no free lunch, no matter how big or generational it is.
And that's a great point there. And in capitalism, there's nothing wrong with failure. Failure provides an opportunity to people to buy assets, pennies on the dollar, start over, rebuild the economy from the ground up, create more capital. But also you have to have a sound monetary policy to do that too. You can't have a functioning economy when the dollar is being devalued every day, because the Federal Reserve is printing so much money every day.
I mean, 2 points. I mean, Alan Greenspan himself on Jon Stewart. Jon Stewart says, how do we have a free market if we have a Federal Reserve? That doesn't make sense. And Greenspan says, you're right. We don't have a free market, but we need a benevolent hand. And that's not what we need. We need market forces. There's no group of oligarchs or mathematicians, economists that are smarter than 300 million people doing the best every day to get the most value for their dollar, and that we need not a gold standard, not a dollar standard. We need competition in currency and a truly free market, and all problems would end up being solved by the free market.
And that's a great point. David Morgan and Chris Marchese, I interviewed them a couple of days ago. They argued for the same case. And I believe you guys did a video on that on the Silver Summit, which people can check out on YouTube, regarding having competing currency, which has been advocated by Ron Paul as well. Now, my final question to you regarding the economic outlook do you believe in the next few years that hyperinflation, deflation, or just more stagflation is likely?
I think I'm in the camp of hyperinflation for two simple reasons. Countries that do not print their own currencies historically default because they cannot print their way out of a debt-based problem. So if you look at Greece, the reason why they're going through this austerity and all the economic pain that they're going to have, and ultimately they'll end up defaulting on the debt because it's completely unsustainable. There's no benefit for young people to go work. There's no opportunity because there's simply not enough capital in the system. They'll ultimately default upon it. And nations that do print their own currency always take the path of least resistance and continue to kick the can down the road, print more money until at some point the psychological event of a hyperinflation where people realize that the game is up, that they can no longer trust the value of the currency, that the bankers and the politicians seem to have a death wish to destroy the dollar, and they flee the dollar and go put it into anything that's tangible. I said I'd much rather see people own Beanie Babies than Apple stock right now, or a Treasury bond, or even cash in their than their bank, because at least a Beanie Baby has some tangible value of cuteness or something. Whereas all these counterparty risk paper assets will intrinsically go back to zero.
And that's a great point. Hey, Chris Duane, thank you for coming on to Wall Street from Main Street podcast. If people want to find out more about what you do, where can they go?
Probably I'm best known for The Greatest Truth Never Told on YouTube. Started about a year ago. We got like 5 million views so far. And my blog is don't-tread-on.me. And I also have a huge free resource called the Sons of Liberty Academy.com. It's essentially everything that I learned to convince me to sell my house, buy silver, become independent of the system, all the psychological, historical, monetary, and many, many more lessons that I learned, for a 3 or 4 year period, condensed into a 48-hour video lesson that I gave away for free. So go to sonsoflibertyacademy.com.
That's great. Well, thank you for your time, and hopefully you can come back in the future for another interview.
Thank you very much for having me on.